thanks for coming, all of you. I'm Shannon Washburn.
Nice to meet you, Shannon.
Ben?
Ben Kircher.
Nice to meet you, Ben. Where are you from?
Oregon.
Oregon, okay. Hi.
His wife, Deanna.
Hi, Deanna. Nice to meet you. Kirk, how are you? Good to see you. Andrea, we met earlier? Okay. Well, this is going to be a weird workshop to do with just a very small number of people in the room, but it's a workshop all the same that I think is really critical importance. And I need to wear the microphone because we're videotaping this, but the reason why I decided to put this workshop together is because I feel like when we think about the shortage of ag teachers, we really need to approach this from a Team Ag Ed standpoint. And while I know local high school ag teachers have plenty on their plates to do, they have an opportunity to interact every single day with the future generation of ag teachers in their states and in other states around the country. So, you know, as I think about the role that I play as a teacher educator at the University of Florida, I understand that I have to be proactive in recruiting students and preparing the next generation of teachers, but I also know that the students that I work with are only as good as the students that are sent to me. And so I think there has to be an important partnership there between active teachers and university faculty to make sure that we recruit the next generation. As you see on the description of the workshop and on the top of my handout, when we think about 10 by 15, if we are to accomplish 10,000 quality programs by the year 2015, the students who are freshmen in high school right now are going to be the first possible students who would be graduating from the university and ready to teach 8 years from now in the year 2015. So those are the students that we're going to have to get into classrooms to accomplish that goal. And local teachers are have the opportunity to interact with them now. So for this workshop, what I'd like to get you to do is to do some thinking, do some conversing with one another, thinking about the impact that teachers can make on students' decision to consider the teaching profession. We know it's a good one, but convincing them of that is another challenge altogether. So what I'd like you to do, first of all, if you would, and I'm going to have you go through this handout, I just want you to kind of reflect on some of your own experiences. Ben, were you an FFA member high school ag student?
Yes.
Okay. And were you? You were not? Okay. Kirk, you were in. Okay. Andrea, how about you? You were? Okay. So I know you're not teaching. Kirk, I know you were. So Ben, I'm going to have to lean on you and Kirk pretty heavily here in our workshop. But what I'd like you to think about is why specifically you became an ag teacher. This is something that's interesting to me, something that I talk to my students who are pre-service teachers about a lot. You know, I think that's a critical question, asking ourselves why we become teachers. But I think these are important questions to go through as we think about what is going to be most effective in having a conversation with our students. So what I'd like you to do for about 5 minutes is just brainstorm, go with your gut reaction of these three questions. Why did you become an ag teacher? What did your ag teacher do or not do to make you decide to teach? And what are 4 reasons why you entered the profession? Or excuse me, why you've stayed in the profession? That's the last question. So if you think through those. Get in here. I have 4 people in the room. 2 people in the room.
I told you should have walked around.
Have a seat. Danette, Marie, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you taking the initiative to be a part of our workshop. Right now what we're doing is we're working through some questions on the front page of our handout.
I don't know how to read.
Yes, you do. You know how to read. So why did you become a teacher? What did your ag teacher do or not do to make you decide to teach? And what has kept you in the profession? Go. I see that, and I'm all over it.
Yeah, I was going to go get some spam.
Okay, Ben, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to pull this off, I think. Why did you decide to teach?
To make a to make a difference in young people's lives.
Okay, good reason. Feel like you're able to do that?
I do.
Okay, all right. Kirk, why did you decide to teach?
I was encouraged by my local ag ed instructor to consider teaching because he thought I'd be really good at it.
So your teacher said, "Hey, Kirk, you should think about teaching." Good. I'm coming. Danette, why did you decide to teach?
Because I love agriculture and working with kids.
Okay. Marie?
I was in love with FFA.
Okay, so Marie's interest in FFA. Andrea's writing a story. Andrea, why did you decide? No, you didn't decide to teach. Why didn't you decide to teach? You should have to answer that question.
Actually, I did decide to teach. I'm an ag ed major.
Oh, are you?
I am.
Wonderful. All right. Very good. So why did you decide to become a teacher?
I loved agriculture through my involvement in FFA. I really got interested in it, and I love being able to work with students. That's definitely my passion.
So the reason why I asked that question is because I remember as an ag teacher myself that I spent a tremendous amount of time with a lot of really, really talented young people. Time after school practicing, time in a suburban going to contests, time taking them home, doing SAE visits, all kinds of interaction with really, really talented students. And I never really had a serious conversation with my students about why I love doing what I do. And I think those are really, really important things for us just to communicate to our kids. You know, this is why I love my job. Here's why I decided to teach. And I think when you look at young people today, actually more than ever, young people are interested in making an impact. They want to do something that's going to have an impact on other people. And if we're not telling them, wow, you'd be really good at this, then we're really missing a huge opportunity to do that. So, going to work around the room again. What did your ag teacher do or not do that made you decide to teach?
He was just a ag teacher. He was my mentor in high school, and he helped me make decisions for my future, and he had made a difference in my life.
So your teacher made a positive impact. Kirk? Well, you already said your teacher told you specifically. Anything else?
We would always have regional or area teacher meetings, and at that point in time, the teacher ed department at Virginia Tech was very instrumental in going out to those meetings, and they would have specific workshops for individuals that wanted to teach, and my ag teacher would say, you know, you need to go to this workshop with us, and so they were bringing in high school students, juniors and seniors primarily, and talk to them about ag education.
When was that?
That was in the 80s.
Okay, great. Hi, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Great.
I'll come back to you. We're talking about things that our ag teachers did to make us decide to become a teacher. Are you an ag teacher? You were? You're retired now? Okay. You remember what your ag teacher did or didn't do that made you decide? You didn't have an ag teacher. Okay. So why did you decide to teach? Put you on the spot here.
I had an FFA student in my class that converted me.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. In college?
No.
Okay.
I was a high school wrestling coach, and I had the state vice president as the captain of my wrestling team. And at our final tournament, before our final tournament, he quit the team so he could run the state FFA convention. And I thought, well, that has to be pretty important because wrestling was pretty important to him too as well. So I packed up my whole class that I was teaching. I was teaching a general ag class and took them to the state convention, blew me away. So I became an ag teacher.
That's incredible. So FFA at work again, making you make that decision. Andrea?
I was definitely the smart kid in high school, and so a lot of the teachers didn't really push me because they assumed that I was just good enough to do the stuff on my own. But my ag teacher actually pushed me. He had a way of finding those skills that I needed to work on, and he pushed me to do it, and I thought that was a great example, and that's the kind of model that I want to do.
So you found a teacher that finally found a way to not just let you be at the head of the pack without any additional challenge. That's great. Danette?
My first ag teacher showed me that there was more to school than books, but then it was a celebration that I could graduate high school.
Okay, Marie?
Oh, my ag teacher was culturally very different from me, and it was kind of cool to hang out with him and, learn some things I didn't know.
So for each of you who had an ag ed experience in high school, the impact that the teacher made was a positive one. It's interesting, and Kurt can probably validate this or may want to refute it, I'm not sure. When I talk with my students who are pre-service teachers and ask them, what was it, ask them this question basically, what was it that your teacher did or didn't do that made you decide to come? Or made you decide to begin to pursue a career in teaching? About half of those students say, I had the worst ag teacher in the world, and I had a rotten experience, and I realized that there was more to do in ag education and FFA than what I got to do, and I wanted to go out and do that because I knew that I didn't get what I got to do. Have you heard students say that, Kurt? About another half, the other half had a tremendous experience, a life-changing experience, something really just clicked between them and their teacher, and they valued that, and they decided, hey, this is for me. They enjoyed working with people, enjoyed working in agriculture, so that was the decision that they made. I don't find many people in the middle of that. There are some, and half is a gross overgeneralization. But by and large, the point that I'm trying to make is that by and large, teachers have a huge impact on that decision. We also work with a lot of students, and more every year it seems, who are interested in ag education and want to become certified to teach, but didn't have an ag education experience. Certainly working with those young people is enjoyable as well. And I'm not trying to suggest in this workshop by any means that we don't want to work with students who haven't come through your programs. But what I do want to emphasize is that as a teacher, there's a tremendous amount that you can do to impact those young people's decisions. I think we kind of get the point here. I'm going to skip over our last conversation, our last question on the front page, the reasons why you've remained in the profession. But I'm going to summarize the point that I'm trying to make there by emphasizing to you how important it is for you in those conversations with young people to say, this is what I love about my job. Have you ever done that, Marie? Danette, you do that? Did you ever tell your students why you loved your job teaching? Hang on. We're gonna have this conversation anyway. Where does the conversation usually start?
After some incident or something where I have to deal with discipline or somebody who's not doing what they should be doing, and one of my kids says, I could never be a teacher. And I'm like, oh, but wait a minute. Exactly. So we start from there.
Absolutely. Young people very regularly tell me, and most of the week I've been working a booth right down here trying to recruit people to teach. And so often I interact with young people who say, I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could do it. And when I ask them why, it's, I couldn't handle the students that I go to school with. I couldn't handle that. I couldn't do it. They don't realize how much they're going to grow up in the time that they're in college and how much they're going to change. And I think when you think about that, when you're 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, you are as mature as you're ever going to be in your life. I mean, you are an adult, right? And that's how they view themselves. They don't think they're going to change. They don't see how much they're going to grow while they're in college. They don't realize that, you know, you will be the bigger person as a teacher, not necessarily physically, although that certainly is a challenge for some young ladies who I talk to, and they say, I'm a small person. I'm not sure I could handle discipline. And that's baloney. And I think all of us know that. But they have this concern that I couldn't handle it because I don't like what my fellow students do to my teacher, and I wouldn't want them to do that to me. So that absolutely is a great starting point for the conversation. I think another thing that happens is we're our own worst enemies. We spend so much time with our students, and we get to know them so well that we feel like we really can tell them anything. And we have bad days. And sometimes the local principal or the school board or some administrator makes a bad decision that ruins our day, and students hear about it because we know them really well. In a lot of ways, they're like family to us. And when those are the things that they hear, those are the things they remember. So I really think it's important for us to think about every time we explain to them the things that we dislike about our jobs, we've got to counter that with at least two positive things that we like about what we do, to kind of keep in mind for them that, wow, that is a good job. And I think the other part of that too is there is no profession in the world that an 18-year-old student has had 13 years of hands-on observation. There's no career choice out there where a young person gets to spend 13 years watching someone do that job before making the decision, is that job for me or not for me? So they really do know a lot more about the teaching profession than any other. And that can be an advantage to us, but it also can be a disadvantage. They also, though, don't see how much you do outside of what you do with them. And, the bigger picture is difficult for them to grasp. So just kind of some introductory thoughts here to get us talking with one another a little bit, because I think that's an important part of this process as well. But I also want to show you some background information. The AAAE organization collects data each year on the supply and demand of teachers, and we've had a period where we didn't have the most reliable data in the whole wide world. So that's why you see some information on your handout here that may look to be a bit outdated. We now have, I believe, and Kurt can probably confirm this as well, we're back on track with collecting a bit more accurate information. But when you look at the supply of teachers, you see, and this probably isn't much of a surprise to those of you who have been around for a while, that we hit a peak in the mid-1970s in the number of students who were ag ed majors and prospective teachers. We've never recovered from the slide that we took in the early 80s in the number of students majoring in ag education. And, one of the first steps that we've got to take is getting back to a level of having more students majoring in ag education. Obviously, I see the students that are in your classrooms as an important place for those students to come from. But in 2001, 1,171 ag ed teaching positions were open, and the school board planned to fill those positions. The same year, 857 students graduated, and this is fairly typical today, I would say. Probably a bit higher are the numbers of pre-service teachers graduating today. Of those 857, this survey asked their professors, how many of them are likely to teach? How many of them do you, as their professor, think, do they want to teach? Of the 857, just under 700 of them, their professor said, this person will probably teach. That year, 509 newly qualified teachers that graduated from a teacher preparation program actually did enter the teaching profession. So about 60%, and that 60% is very consistent year in, year out. About 60% of the students graduating from our teacher prep programs decide to enter teaching. And I would tell you that may not necessarily be a bad thing. I would like to see that number be a little bit higher, but I'm not 100% convinced that 100% of our graduates are designed to be teachers. I think we need some of our students to make the decision on their own that, hey, this profession isn't for me. But what we need to do is figure out a way to increase that number of students and maintain that 60% who enter the profession. And so that's what this workshop is kind of designed to help you start to think about. One of the things that I often hear from students is that they are attracted to the teaching profession by the idea that this is something that I can do at home. In other words, I can move back to my home county. I can move back to within an hour's drive of mom and dad. I can live near the family farm at least, so I can remain active in the family farm in some cases, and stay close to home. I think a lot of that 60% that we see, a lot of that 60% are made up of students who wanted to teach but couldn't find a job close enough to home, so they took another position doing something else that would enable them to be close to home. So one of the things we've got to help our young people understand is there are tremendous opportunities in teaching in your home state. Okay, and I think in every state in the country we have a shortage of teachers now. There are lots of opportunities for you to stay in your home state and take a job. You may not right away be able to teach right around home. Okay, so it's important to begin to broaden their definition of what close to home might mean. And that is absolutely something that I work on. Steve Roca and I, one of my doctoral students, and I did a study in 2004 of all of the teaching interns during the fall semester of 2004 who were doing their student teaching. Of those students, 80% of them told us that they plan to teach within 60 miles of home. And when you think about the number of programs that are within 60 miles of your program, how many are there? 6? Okay. Marie, quite a few in your situation. Danette in Marion County, Florida, quite a few. How many? None within 60 miles. What state? Alaska. Okay. Okay. Probably a bit more spread out there. Kirk, you're not teaching now. Are you a teacher now?
I want to say 10 to 12 within a 60-mile radius.
In what state?
Northwest Ohio.
Okay, in Ohio. So when we think about those students, there may or may not be opportunities the year that they graduate that would enable them to stay close to home. So I think that's an important thing for us to think about as well. What can we do to get them to enter the profession for a short time maybe not necessarily close to home, and help them realize that teaching is a pretty mobile profession. And when an opportunity close to home does open, you can move into that position. Some other things I want to get you to think about here. There's just some information about where those other graduates went. You'll find that on page 3 of the handout. Other careers that they entered other than teaching. But on page 4, I want you to begin to think about, in your home state, what can we do about the challenge of the teacher shortage? So first of all, identify how many teachers are in your state. Second of all, if you know, roughly how many positions are open in your state each year. Jot those numbers down really quick. And you may or may not know, but I would encourage you to find out, because that's an important thing to converse with your students, to share with them that information. This spring, by the way, at the University of Florida, we'll have, on our 2 campuses in Florida, we'll have 17 graduates this year. Consistently, and that's an improvement for us. Unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say that. Consistently, year to year in Florida, we have 30 to 35 positions open. So when I recruit students, one of the things that I will always tell them is there are 2 to 3 positions for every one of our graduates. And when we look at this economy, and as I look at my counterparts throughout the rest of the College of Ag and Life Sciences at UF, there are not many departments on campus that can say there's going to be 2 or 3 positions for every one of our graduates. For the last 7 years, we've had 100% of our students who wanted to teach were able to find a teaching position in the state of Florida. And that's probably not a surprise to you with that kind of statistics. But I think it's important for us to think statewide. And each one of you is a member of Team Ag Ed in your respective home state. Statewide, what can we do to realize, number one, what is our demand statewide? If you don't know how many teachers are going to be needed each year, you need to find out in your state. So how many are we going to need? And roughly how many are graduating each year and getting ready to enter the profession? What I try to encourage Florida teachers to think about is that if every teacher had 1 student every 5 years, 1 student every 5 years who would decide to enter the profession, we wouldn't have a shortage of teachers. And surely, there's not a teacher in this room who can tell me that of all the students you see on a yearly basis, there's not 1 every 5 years who wouldn't make a great ag teacher. That's not that hard, I don't think. I don't think that's an unrealistic goal to shoot for. But I will tell you that in Florida, we're nowhere near that. We're nowhere near that. The funny thing is, I have a few teachers that will send us 1 or 2 students every single year. And as I was putting my thoughts together for this workshop, I talked with some of those teachers and I said, what are you doing? You know, how is this happening? Because, you know, while they're great teachers, they're not all that much better than others. And so I asked the question, what is it that you do? And what I heard is that they actually talk to their students and they say, hey, have you ever thought about teaching? You'd be a great teacher. That's it. And they're consistent with that message. So what I'd like you to think about is the message that we send to our students. What do we specifically, intentionally tell our students about the teaching profession on a regular basis? What are the things we tell them? That's the next question on our sheet here. So spend a couple of minutes and think through, these are the things that I consistently tell my students that I like about the profession, that is good about the profession, or maybe that is bad about the profession. So think through that for a minute. I'm going to ask a few of you to share those. I'm sorry.
Are you going to pick on us?
You met Ashley Allen?
Yeah, I haven't talked to her here.
No, she's not here, but did she call you? She said
Yes.
she had an appointment.
Yes, we have an appointment. Yep. We had an appointment. She canceled it. We have another appointment. Buckley. Sends the students all the time. Okay. Let me ask you, a few of you, to share some of those ideas if you don't mind. Does anybody mind sharing some of the things that they consistently tell their students about the profession? Can I pick on some of you? All right, Marie. Thanks.
I like to let them know about the independence of being a high school teacher. I mean, I have a boss and I have things that I have to do, but it's my domain in that classroom, and the way I do things is the way I want them done. And so you don't always get that in other jobs. You might have somebody looking right over your shoulder telling you what to do and when to do it, and it's not that way. That's one of the things I like, so I try to...
And while we may be personally frustrated with the challenges, the increasing challenges of standardized testing and demands on our curriculum and needing to prove ourselves, there is still a tremendous amount of freedom as an ag teacher in deciding what you get to teach, how you're going to teach it, when you're going to be outside, when you're going to be inside, and young people enjoy that kind of freedom. The next thing I'd like you to kind of just spend a little bit of time thinking through is, what are some of the messages that our students receive about the teaching profession? Unintentionally or not, what are the things that if I were to come into your classroom and interview some of your students, what would they tell me you think about your job? And I'm not going to ask you to share those. But I think that's an important process for you to go through, a thought process to go through. You know, if somebody walked in and asked my students what messages I send to my students about the profession, there are probably days when, and we all have them, you know, God bless you, you deal with enough challenges that I know there are tough days. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, what would your students say you think about your job? Would they tell me that, you know, he's really, really good, or she's really, really good, but I don't know why he's still here or she's still here? Would they tell me that you don't seem happy? Would they tell me that you're frustrated with salary? Would they tell me you're frustrated with administration? You know, do they pick up on those messages, do you think, or not? And I'm not going to ask you to think through those things. I'm not going to ask you to say those things out loud, but I think it's important to think through those things. Because we do, again, going back to that really great relationship we have with our kids, they pick up on a lot. And they think a lot about, when you have students who think a lot of you, they also think a lot about you. And the little things that slip out, the little frustrations that come out in the Suburban on the way to a contest or whatever, those are things that they pick up on. And of all weeks, this week I know is an exciting time for you, but you're spending 24/7 with your students this week. And, you know, if you can't be excited this week and sharing a positive message, then that's... maybe you need to think about the message you're sending. Let me leave it at that before I dig myself into a deeper hole. I took an informal straw poll, and I don't have a lot of scientific evidence to back this up, but in bottom third or so of page 4, I took an informal straw poll in a couple of my classes of students, and I said, you know, what are your concerns about teaching? And these are consistent with what I hear from young people that are your students that walk up to me in my booth down the aisle here. I'm not patient enough to be a teacher. Teachers don't get paid enough. I don't know enough about agriculture to teach. That one, folks, is huge. Probably the biggest fear in my students who are going to go out to student teach in February. Those students who are just about ready to graduate but haven't yet started student teaching are terrified that they don't know enough about ag. I haven't had enough ag classes, Dr. Washburn. I don't think I can do this. Where am I going to go? What if my kids know more than I do? You remember thinking those things? What do you do? I don't do I can't do what my ag teacher did. That's a big one. Some of the best programs in our state, I never get students from those programs. Because when you do a wonderful job with your job, the bar is set so high for what a great ag teacher does that to a 17, 18-year-old it seems unattainable. I couldn't ever do what my ag teacher does. Well, nobody's going to expect you to do that in year number 1. But when you're in year number, how many years have you taught, Ben?
8.
Yeah, after 8 years of teaching, you get a heck of a lot better, and it comes a lot easier, and you add new things. But there's this notion that that's what a teacher does. I don't want to be stuck in a classroom forever. That's a very common thing. And with Generation Y, when we look at the statistics, those are not young people who want a 30-year career doing the same thing. That is the most god-awful thing for them to think about. That's not attractive to them. So what can we do about that? Teaching is another one of those weird professions where the job that you have in year number 1 is pretty much the same job that you have in year number 30. The expectations, the responsibilities don't really change that much. And so for a young person to think about that as a long-term career, where can I go from the classroom is an important thing. And I think one of the things, if we're going to get young people to enter the profession at all, we need to present to them that teaching is not, the only pathway that you can take with a degree in ag education or with teaching experience. Every single year in the state of Florida, we lose teachers to industry positions. Because, many of you in the room have probably had offers to do other things. Danette's one of them. She did leave. But we know that if you can do a great job teaching, you can do anything. And those opportunities are out there. There honestly is a legitimate concern that young people have that ag education programs may not exist in the next 15 years. Is there a future in ag education? And when I have a young person in my office with mom and dad, mom's concerns are always, are you going to take care of my baby? Dad's concerns are always, are there scholarship opportunities? What's the salary like? And how long are there going to be jobs in ag education? And my answer always is, if we don't find great people like your son or daughter to enter the profession, they're not going to be there for long. Because the teacher turns the key, as you all know. Ag education is, shifting gears just a little bit here. Ag education is, and there's a blank there, ag education is a discovery major. How many of you in this room who were ag education majors, or Andrea, who are ag education majors, how many of you had ag education as your first major in college? Okay, we got the cream of the crop in here. About half, though. What was your major? Was not ag education. Phys ed.
Ag journalism.
Ag journalism. Animal science. Workforce training and development. Animal science. So about half of our group here did not start as an ag education major. Okay? Some of you entered the profession without majoring in ag education at all, and that's fine. Hopefully we can encourage young people to major in ag education, because I hope you would agree that might be the best way to get them prepared for year number 1. When we think, though, about the decision of a 16, 17, 18-year-old young person, it's really difficult for a lot of young people to say to their friends, to their family, to important people in their lives, I want to be a teacher. For a lot of young people, they make that decision while they're in school. And maybe the seed has been planted earlier, But I have a young lady working my booth who this week decided to change her major. She's a food science and human nutrition major. She wasn't an ag ed student in high school, but she started asking questions. I don't like my food science major. I don't want to be a dietitian. I don't want to sit in a hospital every day and tell people that you have to cut out salt, you have to cut out cholesterol. Yeah, she's not excited about doing that. She said, a lot of people have told me in my life that I could teach. And I think I probably should have listened. So we're meeting on Thursday and she's changing her major. But those are things, those are ideas that when a student is a freshman or a sophomore in high school and you say, you would be a tremendous teacher. Have you thought about teaching? And you really have a genuine conversation with that person face to face, one to one, instead of in front of the whole class, but one on one, saying, Johnny, you'd be a great teacher. Have you ever thought about it? Those are seeds that remain in the back of the brain. And when that young person gets to college and they hit chemistry and they realize, wow, I'm really probably not going to go to vet school, am I? They remember those little kernels that you planted. And they think, wow, I kind of like working with people. And I'm not saying that ag ed is a backup plan or is a default major, but it's just difficult for a young person to say, this is what I want to do. So we have a lot of students who transfer in. And here's why I go through all of that with you. The role that you play during Christmas break, over summer vacation, when your graduates come back to say hi, is a huge, huge role. And I know all of you in this room have had a conversation with a former student who comes back to visit. They're in college, and it just isn't going so well. That's a wonderful time to remind them, you're really good with people. Have you thought about teaching? Because even if the grades aren't so good, 9 times out of 10, the grades aren't so good because they're not excited about what the current major is. And with a little encouragement from you, again, this is maintaining contact with those former students. With a little encouragement from you, you can make a big difference even then. Going back to my straw poll in class, about 60% of my students decided to teach after they graduated high school. You play an important role with your former students. Only 33% of my students had an ag teacher tell them they should become a teacher while they were in high school. And again, that's not scientific evidence. That's an informal straw poll with 2 or 3 classes. But I asked them, I counted the hands that went up. They don't have ag teachers telling them they would be good teachers. And I think they will be. 2/3 of them had an ag teacher encourage them to teach while they were in college. Okay, so that follow-up with your former students is important. 93% of them had a teacher actually discourage them from pursuing teaching. And of those, about 40% had an ag teacher discourage them from teaching. Again, going back to my most recent experience, I had a young lady in my booth this morning. Her mom was her ag teacher. I said to the young lady, have you thought about teaching? And she said, yeah, I have. I'd love to be an ag teacher. My mom doesn't think I should. That is so sad that happens. And what do I say? What am I supposed to say to not only her ag teacher, but to her mom about that decision? The kid would love to do it. And I have a parent and an ag teacher at the same time discouraging that from happening. That's frustrating in my position. We don't need to do that. But here's what I think that goes back to. A lot of times, ag teachers view their students like family. And when we think about our children, those of you who are parents, when we think about our children, we want more for them than we have ourselves. Does that sound familiar? When you think about your students who are really, really talented academically, unfortunately, we say you can do something bigger and better than teaching. You can get into vet school. You can be an ag engineer. You know, you can do something bigger in agriculture than just teach. Because we think, well, it's good enough for me, but you're better than me. And that's a huge mistake, folks. You know, there's no greater compliment to a young person than to say, I think you would be great at what I do. If you've got a student who respects you and loves the job that you do for them every day, you will make their day by saying you would love doing what I do and you'd be good at it. But we don't do that often enough. Some of us do. None of us do often enough. So as kind of with some of that as a backdrop, I want you now, and Ben, I'm going to have you, I think, move back here so you have a group to work with. Kirk, I'm going to have you two get together. If you two can get together, and maybe Andrew, you can slip back here to the back. What I'd like you to do is talk in small groups. Come up with some ideas. What can we do to encourage our current students to consider teaching? What are some of the things that we can do to get them to think about it? The questions on page number, and I realize it's page number 5, but you can't see the 5. The questions on page 5 are what I'd like you to work through. Pick whichever ones you want. The questions above the ones with the numbers. Okay, so there's 4 questions there. How can you encourage your students? What can you do to create opportunities for your students to teach? How can you advise your former students, and in what ways can you partner with your local university? Tackle those for a minute. This is this is a 1 o'clock workshop. We're just nope, not quite. Yeah, really. I know we are very quickly running out of time, and I know you have obligations to get back to your students, many of you, so I hate to interrupt your conversation because I think these are important things to think about. But what are some of the things that you came up with as ideas to encourage your students to think about teaching?
We were talking about making the lessons real and be an example. We can give them lip service all day long, but until we live what we're preaching, the kids will not buy it. So you're setting the example for them to follow.
So, life role model. Yeah, absolutely. And modeling what needs to be done in the classroom. Yeah, great. Ideas back here, things you can do to encourage people to teach.
Oh, in my classroom, all of them, whether it's my Ag 1, Ag 2, or Ag Mechanics or whatever, I have students teach a certain part of the curriculum. As a group, they'll do group teaching or individual teachings, and sometimes that sparks an interest.
Absolutely. One of the things that one of the gentlemen in our state that consistently sends us ag ed majors, when I asked him, why do you get so many people to decide to teach, he said, I make them teach. I make them teach at school. You know, they get a chance to watch 13 years of teaching, but not very often do they actually get an opportunity to practice it. And we have a tremendous opportunity in ag education with that flexibility that Marie mentioned earlier to give them the chance to practice while they're there. Let them coach the CDE team. You don't have to. Give them some responsibility there. Other ideas?
Set up a job shadow with a neighboring teacher.
Yeah. And that's a very good point. Make them go watch somebody else. They already know you. They know what you do every day. But somebody else can tell them things that they will hear in a much different way than they will hear it coming from you. Great opportunity there. Some other things that you can do there. What? Ideas from this group?
I take my high school kids through about 4 or 5 ag in the classroom lessons, teach them how to teach it, and then make appointments with them to teach those same lessons in an elementary class. And then, believe it or not, a lot of them decide that they want to be elementary teachers, but not ag educators and not necessarily high school teachers, mainly because we don't have ag education programs in this state.
And I think a really important thing to remember, too, is when you give them those opportunities to teach and you see that natural talent, it's so important to follow that up. That's the time for the one-on-one conversation. You know, I saw you do a great job and I could tell you liked what you were doing. Have you ever thought about teaching? You know, that's the time to make it happen. And that opportunity that you give them in your classroom opens the door for that conversation. In 2006, Steve Roca and I again did some studies with his university where he works, California State Fresno. Also at the University of Florida, I've conducted similar studies at the University of Missouri, where we found that among those students who were former FFA members, the ag teacher was the most influential person in their life in their choice of a college major. And I can show you mountains of research on college choice that study after study after study after study says the parents are the most influential person in a student's choice of college and choice of major. But in ag education, I have at 3 institutions conducted the same research. Those students who were in FFA, their ag teacher was more influential than their parents in their choice of a university and their choice of a major. You make a huge impact on your students, whether you know it or not, in the decisions that they make that affect their career, their entire career. I gave you some spaces there for you to jot down the names and email addresses of current and former students that you would like to recommend to teach. Here's why I ask you to collect their email addresses. I know a lot of ag teachers at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the semester will have their students fill out some kind of contact information form. If you don't have an email address on that form, add it. Collect their email addresses. That's the world your students live in. The other reason why I tell you to do that is because this is an email that I love to receive. As a university faculty member, I spend probably, what would you say, Kirk? Half of our day? At least a third of my day dealing with email. That's the world that I live in. I love to receive an email from an ag teacher that says, this is a young person who would like to become an ag teacher. They would be really good at it. I would encourage you to talk with them. And I would love it if you would copy that student on that email. Number one, that's a really strong message to send to that student, that you would talk to a university faculty member and encourage them to teach. But number two, that way I have their email address and they have my email address. That's the world I live in. If all you give me is a mailing address, I'm not going to get to it as soon as I need to, because I've got to type out a letter, I've got to print it out, I've got to print out an envelope, I've got to actually physically get my butt out of my chair and walk to the mailroom and drop that envelope off. It's never going to happen. But if you'll send me an email, that's easy. I can cut and paste a form letter, make some personal touch about you, and send it. And now I have opened a dialogue with a prospective student. When they receive an email from me, they feel like, wow, I can write an email back. It's a lot easier for them to write an email than it is to pick up the phone or come to my office. And that they're comfortable with that. Some other suggestions that I have for you to think about ways that you and your colleagues in your home state can work with your university faculty in ag education are in the gray box there. I'd encourage you to think about those things. Think about what you can do back home, to encourage your colleagues and to encourage your university partners to establish a stronger partnership. At the bottom there is a great article that came out of the Ag Ed magazine. I don't know if you've ever read that magazine, but a lot of times young people are concerned about salaries. You know the greater rewards that come from a career in teaching. And those are things to really encourage your students to think about. I'd be happy to visit with you some more as we wrap up our workshop this afternoon. Hopefully you've found a few ideas that you can take home and put into practice with your students. You make such a critical difference in your students' decisions that I think it's important to be reminded regularly that you can and should encourage your young people to consider your career. There's no greater compliment to pay to your students. I'd be happy to visit with you more one-on-one about any ideas that I've shared with you or any ideas that you might have. I'm always looking for ideas to do my job as a recruiter better. So I'd be happy to visit with you. I would also greatly appreciate if you would fill out the pink evaluation form. And Mike put out, I don't know what this blue form is. Some additional feedback about the workshop. The other thing that I put out on the table, those of you who are classroom teachers, I want to be familiar with the curriculum that we have produced through a grant with NASA and USDA. We produced this curriculum at the University of Florida. This is the student piece. This is the third of 3 volumes of a student magazine designed at the middle school level to get them to think about the connections between agriculture and space. And the idea is that students have a natural attraction to space research, but there's a lot of horticulture and ag-related research that's going into the space program. So we developed Growing Space as a student magazine. At www.spaceag.org, you can also download the lesson plans that correspond with the student magazine articles. You can also, at that website, request classroom quantities of this magazine for your students if you're interested in doing that. We've got USDA and NASA money to produce this, so please use up these magazines. We'll send them to you free of charge if you can put this into your classroom. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed working with you this afternoon.